Welcome everyone, and I hope you're ready to learn. I have electric bills here, I have notes. We're gonna actually get thorough about whether or not an outdoor wood boiler can be beneficial for you. All right, so I'm in the shop because it's windy outside, and hopefully this will make it to where there's no wind noise on the mic. I'm about to put an electric bill from April up on the screen, and that electric bill is going to show the entire year as well. When you read it from left to right, it would be April 2021 through April of 2022 on the far right. It also has the average temperature. The average temperature is derived by simply adding whatever the high temperature for a day was. So if the average temp today is, or the high temp today is, say, actually it's 74. It's supposed to be 74 today. I know it's unusually high for November 9th, but 74 for the high and it's supposed to be 57 for the low. What they would do is they'd add those two together. So it's 131. They'd take 131, divide it by 2, and that takes you back to 65.5 degrees. So that would be the average temp for today. Now they would do that for every day of the month of November, and then what they would do is they'd add all those average temps together and divide it by the 30 days that are in November, and that gives the average temp for the month. They do that for any month of the year. That's just how they figure it out. What I want you to focus on though is November, December, and January. So November obviously is warmer than December and January. Our coldest month of the year is February. We're going to get to that. There's something unique about February, and that's why we're going to admit it. Anyhow, November, if you look at the graph, we use somewhere around 150 to 200 kilowatt hours, because on the left-hand side, it'll show how many kilowatt hours. On the far right, it's showing what the average temperature was in correlation to that red line that goes across. So when you look at that graph, November is going to show you somewhere around 200 kilowatt hours were used. And then December is going to show you somewhere around 650, 675 kilowatt hours were used. And January is going to show you right around that 800 mark for kilowatt hours used. And that's accurate. And that was also with pure wood boiler heat, no other heat. So in February, I'm saying that we're going to omit that one on this test because there's a lot of things that happen. Number one, I'm a soldier and I travel around sometimes for the Army, and I did not have time to cut firewood. So towards the end of the month, we actually ran out of firewood. My wife had to switch over to electric heat. And it wasn't a big deal because we did have a real cold spell, and that's why we went through more wood than I anticipated. On the brighter note, that cold spell ended right around the time that we ran out of firewood, and the temperatures were warmer. Mid and upper 50s was kind of the highs, so it was nice. It wasn't bad. The downside was that the last week, maybe a little more of that month, we did use pure electric. So electric furnace. No wood boiler was used for the last week or so of February, and it drove that kilowatt hour usage very high. The other thing is the beginning half, because it was so cold out, we were working on some equipment in here and we wanted to be able to work without gloves on. So we had this heat exchanger on, and at the time this building was not insulated. So if you weren't near the heater, you didn't get any heat basically. It would come off that heater, go touch whatever is nearby, and come out the top. Now the building is insulated, so different story. But that's why I'm saying that we need to omit February. So look at January and March. Look at the temperatures and look how similar they are. Those temperatures are averaged out to about the same. On January, for instance, though, we only used that 800-ish mark of kilowatt hours. But if you look at March, when it was electric furnace only, so pure electric furnace, we used about 1,100 kilowatt hours. That's not that bad. It wouldn't be a terrible electric bill. But I will say this as well. When we're using the wood boiler, the temperature set in the house is 74 at the lowest and typically somewhere around 75, 76. Because when I get home after being bundled up outside all day in the Army, I don't have a bunch of layers of clothes on. I want to be comfortable in my house. It's very simple for me just to turn the heat up, and it doesn't really cost me much more. It runs the fan, and that's it. So the fan and obviously we'll burn a little more wood. It's so efficient that I'm not as concerned about it. So in January, we maintained the house at least 74 degrees. However, in March, we probably only maintained it around 70. We typically, if we're on electric furnace, we will try to keep it around 70, and myself, the wife, kids, hey, if you're cold, go put a sweater on or get your robe, just because it costs so much more. April was another unique situation. We actually got a new HVAC system. We had AC heating and cooling install a heat pump because the simple fact that like March was not that bad. And it did have some, like a week of real cold weather, and then that's probably why it averaged out the way it did. But the rest of the year, or the rest of that month, was still in the 50s, you know, for the high, mid 50s for the high or so. It wasn't that cold. The electric furnace is so inefficient that it just costs a lot more. That's all it is. There's nothing, and it does produce heat. It's hard to argue that. It's just not the cheapest way to produce heat. So April comes around, now we have a heat pump. Other than that, really nothing changed. So the design and everything of the heating and air conditioning of the house, all is the exact same. Everything was sized the same, nothing is changing. The only thing that changed between the two was the simple fact that we added a heat pump. So April was unique because we added a heat pump. Now we have a third option for heat, and a heat pump is actually pretty cheap to run in comparison to a electric furnace. Is it as cheap as running the wood boiler? No, because the wood boiler is putting out 130-ish degree air through the vents, and the heat pump is only doing probably around 90 to 100, depending on how cold it is outside. So the blower motor would run a lot less if you have hotter air coming through, is what I'm getting at. But it's still a far cheaper alternative than the electric furnace. So hopefully you can hear me over the wind. But now that we got the electric bills out of the way and you can see the efficiency in comparison by electric bill, I want to show how the system works and what all is entailed. So our wood boiler used to be over here where you see that pool. And we moved it over here when we built this shop behind me. And we actually moved it, we did everything ourselves. We used a tractor, lifted it up. This thing weighs like 5,000 pounds. We used our tractor, lifted it, and brought it over here. They poured a concrete pad for us when we had them pour the concrete for the shop. Set this on here, and then we also had some excavating done by a neighbor who has a backhoe. So all they did was they dug down 2 foot deep. So all the way up to here, where you see this concrete, and you'll see in a second inside. It's 2 feet deep. Both of these lines go down there, 2 feet. This one on the left obviously goes over to the shop. The one on the right goes down 2 feet. So from the wood boiler over to here and up to the house, the snow does not melt on the surface of the ground. And I'm mentioning this because it was all buried 2 feet deep, and it was very good, well insulated lines. The old wood boiler was right here and had a much shorter run to the house. However, the people that put it in, it was a cheaper line, it wasn't well insulated, and unfortunately it let a lot of heat escape. So anytime that we have a little bit of snow, or any snow at all, even if we got a foot of snow, this path right here that would lead to the old wood boiler where it was, it would melt. Even if we had a foot, I mean, it'd be melted within a day or so. It just lost that much heat. And it was still more efficient, even with it losing that heat, it was still more efficient to run the wood boiler heat than it was the electric furnace. The electric bills I showed you though are all based off of how we have everything set up now. So I mentioned before that this building was not insulated before. However, it is now. And since we have this heat exchanger in here, so this one, just like I talked about, that 2 feet deep, and then it actually comes down, and we brought this straight up through the concrete. And we brought it straight up through the concrete because if this is a short enough run that if we had to replace the lines, it's actually not that hard to do. You can't see it because of this being wrapped. However, there's a 90-degree fitting back here. That's actually a PEX fitting, but there's 2 90-degree fittings over there for both those lines. So you have I think you can see it. So there's a blue line right there. So that's the return. So that's going back to the wood boiler. This red line right here is coming from the wood boiler. This is the heat exchanger. It's basically just a radiator. Some of them come in an A-coil form. This one doesn't. And actually the one on the furnace inside does not either. All the air that's pulled through by the blower motor just comes right through it, and it's heated up when it comes through it. Same thing that happens in here. There's a blower motor in there. Obviously that's a, I don't want to say custom because it's a homemade heat exchanger, and it works really well. It blows a lot of air, and we actually added that filter. I know that filter actually should be down there over the heat exchanger. Now we're probably a little overboard on the insulation. So I left most of the insulation on the lines and as best as I could. The reason being is because I don't want to lose any heat. If I can keep more of that heat in there, that's more of that heat that's going to go to the house. The only thing I don't wrap is the pumps because I always worry about them getting too hot, and these are heat sinks on the pump so that they can stay cool. Other than that, the lines, I'll wrap all of them. We have them wired to where they plug in. So I do it like this for two reasons. One, if I don't want to run one pump, it's easy just to unplug it. The other reason is because if a pump fails, so I have the length of these plugins are the same length on both of them, because let's say that the pump for the house fails, I can pull the one off the shop where I don't need heat, I just like to have heat, and put it back on the house until I can get a new pump. Now I do keep another pump on hand just because of that potential, but it's not a bad thing to have a backup because I don't want to use the electric heat if I don't have to. But at the end of the day, if I had to use the electric heat for 2 or 3 days to get a pump, it's not the end of the world either. So we set our temperature through this control. So this is a Woodmaster 5500, the wood boiler itself, and this is the controller for it. So it's a digital readout, and it'll tell me what the temperature of the water is. All right, so it's going to say LA because it's low alarm. So 61 degrees is what the temperature of that water is right now. Until we reset the low alarm, it will not kick the fans on. But let's say that I'm going to go ahead and fire it up. So what I would do is I'd hit set, and then it'll kick my fans back on. What we generally do is we actually have ours set to 180 with a 20-degree offset. So at 180 with a 20-degree offset, what that means is that so if I just get this started today, right, it's going to keep, those fans are going to keep going until this temperature right here shows 180 degrees. Once it reaches 180 degrees, it's going to turn those fans off like you just seen. When it turns those fans off, then the fire is just going to smolder, and it's not going to waste a bunch of wood and burn it and waste a bunch of heat. It's going to preserve it essentially and keep that fire ready to go for when those fans kick back on, which is going to be when that temperature falls down below 160 with a 20 degree. So a 20-degree offset means that our temp is set to 180, but I want the fans to stay off until it falls down below 160. Now you can set it anywhere between, I think, 1 degree and 20 degrees. So you can make it to where it's always keeping it at the same temperature, but we've found that it's just not necessary. So inside the firebox here, this is the firebox. So you can see we have a bunch of wood in here already because we're actually going to light this tomorrow. Our temperatures are about to get to where they're only in the mid 40s for the high, and it's going to be like that for the foreseeable future, like next few weeks at least. So it's just time to light it. It is November, today is November 9th, and it's not, you know, it's unusually warm today and tomorrow, but yesterday and the days before it was about average, around 57 degrees. Anyhow, in the back there you can see where that fan comes through, and then this fan on the front actually blows through this, comes out here, and it blows into here and under, and has a bunch of perforations. There's one, you can see one of those holes, but it has holes like that all the way down. Makes it to where the air can come out anywhere in that firebox. Ideally, you want that fire to burn all the way through, not just in the front, not just in the back. You want it to burn all the way through, and that's why there's 2 fans. It's 5 feet deep. Yes, you could put a 5-foot log in here. So you can do like this, and you can cut your firewood. That's generally what we do. However, there's a local mill where we get the bedding, the sawdust bedding for our sheep, for the barn. They also happen to have chunks like this that they sell. So you can buy stuff like that from the mill. And it's, so all of this that you see sitting here, that's $150 worth of wood. I know that sounds like a lot. However, that would still be cheaper than running an electric furnace, as you've seen on the electric bills at the beginning. These are convenient though because it works out well for my wife. So if I'm not home, my wife can throw these in here. And the fun fact is that once that temperature is up, so let's say it gets to that 180 that we want, to maintain that temp all day and heat our home at around a 40-degree temperature for the high and 20s overnight, it'll take about 5 to 6 of these, maybe 7. It just depends on how windy it is. Sitting right here, that $150 worth of wood is roughly 30 days worth of use. So this stuff is actually a tree that we had right here on our farm that is just, it needed to come down. It's in a fence line, and if I don't take it down, it's pretty much guaranteed that it was going to fall into our hayfield and destroy a fence with it. So we went ahead and took it down. Now you can see that these are all cut about 4 foot long. I guess what I'm getting at with the firewood is A lot of things differ from it. So the size of it, the density of it, is it an oak or is it a pine? A pine obviously is going to burn quicker because it's a softer wood. If you're cutting your own though, you can make them whatever size you want. So I like to cut them around 3 to 4, sometimes 5 feet, just depends how big they are, and then stuff them in there. I also like to find ones that are, say, 1.5 feet or so in diameter, and you can open this. I can set one end in on this lip right here, and I can come back here, pick up the other end, and slide it in. And I like doing that because if I get one piece, so let's say that I put a 1.5 foot piece, or 1.5 in diameter, because this opening right here is a little over 2 feet. So basically a 2 foot diameter log would fit through here, up to 5 foot long. So anyways, if I get one that's about 1 foot or 1.5 feet in diameter and I put that in there, that thing will be in there for 2 to 3 days. Especially if it's a 5 foot piece, like I don't have to check the fire for at least 2 days. Even if it's 40 degrees out, because it will burn a much longer time. The more pieces you put in there, and the smaller those pieces are, the more surface area they have. The more surface area they have, the more places they have for the ability to catch fire. And it's a good thing when you want the fire to get going. It's a bad thing when you're just trying to maintain a fire, sort of. It depends on what kind of fire you need. If you need a real hot, fast fire, yeah, you want smaller pieces with lots of surface area to catch fire. If you want a fire like this where it's fan forced and I just want to be able to have fuel in there, essentially the wood, to catch fire, then one big solid piece is far better. This is George, our livestock guard dog. And I'm not like him at all. I don't like the cold. This guy loves it. He'll lay out there when it's 10 degrees out and wind's blowing real hard, just smile on his face. He's like, oh, it's so nice out.